Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Perth East Council, this 10th day of January 2023. I'll call the meeting to order. If everyone could please bow their head for a moment of reflection. Thank you. We need confirmation of the agenda. Is there anything anyone wishes to add, change, delete? If not, then a motion to accept the agenda as presented, moved by Jeremy, second by Amanda. All in favor? Carried. Okay, if you have pecuniary interest, you can disclose that now or as we go along. We have 17 items in our consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions on any of those items or want one pulled? No? Okay, so a motion to, items 5.1.1 to 5.117 is set out on the consent agenda for the January 10, 2023 regular meeting of council be received for information and that the minutes of December 20, 2022 regular council meeting be adopted. Moved by Jerry, second by Amanda. All in favor? Carried. We do have a delegation tonight, and we welcome members of our public library. We have Laura Hallahan and Mark Steffen. And if you just want to sit up at the desk, that would be great. And then the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council and staff. It is wonderful to have this opportunity to present an overview of the library's organizational review that was conducted last winter. As you may be aware, the library underwent an organizational review last winter. The driving force behind the organizational review was to gain third-party input on the organization, especially in regards to the library's staffing structure. The organizational review allowed for a third party to analyze and assess the library's current processes, practices, services, staffing, and organization to identify opportunities for efficiency in service delivery and identify projected service and staffing needs. Kendra Roth, the CEO, will speak to the process, and both her and Chair Laura Hallahan will review the recommendations made from the organizational review.
Pesce and Associates, they were awarded the contract to do the review, and they evaluated library's current documents, which included employee structure, current job descriptions, service delivery, and operating processes. Their team then identified skills, abilities, training, mentoring needs for areas of responsibility and succession planning considerations that are appropriate to meet the current and emerging workload needs. Pesce and Associates also then met with stakeholders and staff, including all the Perth East Public Library staff, Township CAO, Township Treasurer, and all the board members for Perth East Public Library Board. In addition to meeting with the stakeholders, Pesce and Associates also met with representatives from identified comparators to analyze different organization structures, policies, and procedures. They then presented a current state analysis to the board and staff before developing the final report, which outlined the future state recommendations. So the current state findings, those highlighted that the board has a strategic plan established, and that guides the board's work. The board ensures that the goals of the board align with those of township and council. The library's biggest challenges include funding, population demographics, and changing service demands. There's also a lack of alignment in roles and staffing hours for certain functions. The current staffing model impacts HR-related processes. So that was the current state finding. Then they did a final report, which showed future state recommendations. This report did allow for board staff and township staff to also give their input back to the report before it was finalized. Then there was 5 categories identified and recommendations were made for each one. I will review the first three, and then Laura Hallahan will address the rest. The first category, corporate strategy, included the following recommendations: development of an operational plan, which the board hopes to complete this year, establishment of key performance indicators, and working closely with the finance team to plan the achievement of strategic goals. For the key performance indicators, myself and the board have begun implementing these, and it helps evaluate library services and programs, and not just by collecting data, but it involves us asking patrons how an event or a service impacts their life. The second category focused on services and programs. Recommendations included the implementation of additional digital services to meet the demands of library users, a review of the hours of operation, and this would be focusing on seeking input from the public, and the development of a learning center with partnerships between colleges, newcomer services, and third parties. The third category provided recommendations to optimize the library's efficiencies in relation to process and practices. These included updating existing and creating new standard operating procedures, regular scheduled team meetings to discuss tasks and project reporting, develop a funding strategy to determine projects and programs for funding, establish a memorandum of understanding between the township and the library. As you know, this was completed last year. Continue collaborations with the township, and develop reimbursement procedure in consultation with the township, and training for new board members. So you'll see there's quite a few operational recommendations that staff can do, as well as recommendations at the board level for governance.
The fourth category made recommendations on the organizational structure itself. Firstly, transitioning the CEO position from a part-time to full-time would allow the CEO to effectively serve the population and continue management of the library, as well as focus on the high-level strategic priorities and advance the goals of the library's strategic plan. Secondly, it was recommended to combine a couple of the part-time positions and to introduce a full-time service coordinator role, and consider reassigning 2 of the existing library assistant positions with part-time roles to roles of outreach and programming coordinator and digital service coordinator. Splitting the roles would allow us to allocate staffing hours to roles that have service demands from the public. The next recommendation was to assess the reliance on part-time staffing arrangements, and finally, implement casual library assistants to cover call-ins and leaves. The final category reflected on staffing and employee development. Recommendations included updating existing job descriptions, determining required competencies for each position, conduct a salary survey to ensure the library is offering competitive wages, training for staff to meet changing service delivery demands, and exploring funding opportunities to assist with educational programs and staff development. There's been considerable work done already in a lot of these areas. The CEO worked with HR at the township to update job descriptions last year. They also regraded these job positions and brought them to the library board to approve the updated job descriptions and the grading of those positions. The board will continue to review and adapt the recommendations made, taking into account both the library and the township's strategic plans. As mentioned earlier, the board, the township, and library staff have been acting on recommendations made, such as introducing KPIs, updating reimbursement procedures, and formalizing an MOU. One of the top priorities identified by the board is addressing the current staffing structure and staffing plan. This includes assessing the CEO position, current staffing compensation, and we like to participate when the township does the next market review. We're also prioritizing the introduction of new positions to deliver satisfactory services and programs, and part-time positions. The board's goal and vision for the staffing plan is to gradually introduce new roles using current staffing levels while continuing to evaluate and assess staffing needs. Instead of implementing new positions right away, the board wishes to take steps to ensure they're compensating current staff appropriately while transitioning to a new employee structure that will retain qualified and trained employees. In 2023, the board is preparing to present service level changes that include a full-time CEO, amending staff compensation based on the grading of revised job descriptions. In 2024 to 27, the board will begin the process of converting 2 of the 4 library assistants into 2 new positions. These positions would be Outreach and Programming Coordinator and Digital Services Coordinator. Beyond 2027, the board and CEO will continue to assess staffing levels to ensure that new positions are functional and improving efficiency in delivering library services. What questions do you have for us?
Okay, thank you. Any questions from members of council? No questions? Wow, I have a couple. The new positions, the digital service coordinator and the program coordinator, so is there a possibility to share that with someone, another library, do you think? Or is that someone that's going to be needed like full-time?
I can answer that one. It likely wouldn't be a full-time position. As far as sharing it with another Perth County library, is that what you're inquiring?
Yeah,
I think PCIN would definitely be open to that conversation. West Perth Public Library would be in a similar situation as us, that they don't have, they currently have a program position, but it's kind of hard to find those staff members who are qualified for that role. So it'd be a great opportunity to look into a partnership for sharing that position, and maybe they would do programming at West Perth and Perth East, or another PCIN library in Perth East. So that would definitely be something to look into in the future. Yeah.
yeah. No, I just wondered, because we're always trying to do that in other departments, share the employees if we can, so.
It might be easier to attract and retain somebody that was full-time as opposed to hiring 2 part-time positions in 2 different libraries.
Yep, yeah. Okay, and then I guess the other one, like, we know that North Perth and West Perth have full-time CEOs. Did you compare the hours and, like, are our hours that we're going to be open comparable to them? Is that how you're going to figure out the hours, or how are you going to figure out what hours you need the library open extra?
Moving the CEO to a full-time would not increase the hours of operation for the public library. So we wouldn't be increasing our weekly hours of operation open to the public.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I assumed it would, but, okay.
We would, if council would like us to do that, we'd be happy to. But
Okay, no, that's fine, so. Okay, anyone else? No? Well, we thank you very much for coming, and we will look forward at the budget to go through this, so. Thanks again for
Thanks.
coming tonight. Okay, we will move now. We have no public meetings or public hearings, and the next item is under planning. We have Sally joining us from the County Planning Office. So she's coming in on the Zoom. And there she is. Hi, Sally. Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? How about now? Okay, great. Thank you. So good evening, board sorry, I'm used to calling you the word now. Good evening, Mayor Eggetts and members of council. It's great to be here and see you guys again, to have that opportunity. I'm gonna share my screen. I have a few slides for you tonight. Are you able to see the Perth County slideshow? Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to review some information around Bill 23 and Bill 109. So Bill 109 was earlier in 2022 and has some or things coming into effect as of January 2023, so now. And then, of course, Bill 23 that came about in the fall and had royal assent in November. So I'm really going to focus tonight on some of the day-to-day impacts, the things that we're going to see on a more common basis, and stick to those types of things. And then certainly the report that I offered covers sort of a wider variety of items that if you have questions about, we can discuss towards the end. So the first one is fee refunds. That's from Bill 109. It comes into effect January 1st. There was some talk of from the province of delaying the start of this. But when you look at the regulations, it's still in there, and there hasn't been any legislative change to cause that delay. So for any applications received on or after January 1st, 2023, and that's specifically zoning bylaw and site plan control applications, then we have essentially 90 days and 60 days respectively to arrive at a decision on those types of applications. And following those statutory timelines of 90 and 60 days, fees would be refunded on a graduated scale. And so what we've done in-house here is implement sort of a day counter to help us track that, with the objective of not exceeding those dates, obviously. And what we want to do then is talk with local staff about, because both of these are fees collected at the lower tier. And so to be refunded by the lower tier. So we want to make sure that that finance staff are prepared in the event that that needs to occur. And then we would work together to give advance notice of those triggers. Because in the system that we offer through our service agreement, the number of days that have passed is sort of more on our radar. So we are tracking that, and then would help to identify that trigger should it be needed. Third-party appeals. So that has been removed for minor variance and consents. That's similar to subdivisions and condos, which was implemented a few years ago through Bill 108, actually. So what this means is that a neighbors essentially wouldn't be able to appeal decisions on minor variances or consents, but the applicant could, and other levels of government could. So what we're doing with that is to help people understand that when they engage in the public process. So there's still circulation on those applications. We still seek input from the public. They just don't have the same rights to appeal once a decision has been made. So similarly, for a subdivision and condo, the change arriving from Bill 23 is that there's no requirement now for a public meeting on a subdivision application. But like I referred to in the appeals bullet just previous to this, we still circulate a notice of application to all the neighbors within a certain distance, and we still seek input from the public on those applications. They need to submit it in writing, and they can call in and talk to staff, have their questions answered, review studies, that type of thing. And then those comments that we receive would become part of our reporting system to the approval authority. And the other point I'd like to make about this is that our practice of coming around to the lower tiers to discuss and review subdivision applications before they go to county council for discussion and decision would still occur. That's still firmly part of our intended practice. And so that brings us to, oh, I wanted to, before I leave this point, if there is, one of the things I'm still sort of weighing and considering frame or concurrently, we're having a public meeting about that development essentially. And the public can participate in that way by attending a meeting. And they see the subdivision reviewed in that way. So the difference really for a subdivision that doesn't have an official plan amendment would be that the initiative really is on the public to come and review it with staff or to ask for information from staff and to not have that public forum necessarily to offer their comments within. So there's certainly pros and cons to this being removed and pros and cons to using some other means. And if we do go that way, then we would develop a policy so that it was clearly communicated to the public how the county intends to have public forums. And one thing to consider, and something that CEO Givens has mentioned too, is that there is maybe a greater need now or a greater interest now in having the developer lead this piece, having them host something. And it would be something that we couldn't force necessarily, but something certainly that we could consider, and what would be the best timing for that during the process. So I think there's some things within this change to explore, and I will continue to gather information and think it through and provide recommendation on this in the future. So that brings us to the scope of engagement for the Conservation Authority and Planning Act applications. 2 items specifically. One is that there was correspondence last week from the Minister of Natural Resources and Forests that the Conservation Authority's scope with respect to planning applications is very clearly natural hazards and natural hazards alone. So erosion and flooding risks. And so that will be the limit to their jurisdiction on planning applications. What's unclear, I think, still is how these changes in the legislation will affect their Section 28 permitting when a planning application is also involved and there is approvals given under the Planning Act. So there is language in the changes from this bill around that, but it lacks a bit of detail for us to fully understand how that's meant to be implemented. And it will be fleshed out in the regulations that come under the Conservation Authority Act, which we're still awaiting. And then another one on this slide is the lapsed subdivision. So this is for subdivisions that have lapsed within the last 5 years. There's an opportunity now, or a window, for folks owning those properties to come forward and say, I'd like you to reconsider reinstating this subdivision. So yes, we had draft approval, and yes, it lapsed, as in we didn't build the subdivision or we didn't fulfill our conditions, but we would like to sort of reinvigorate it. And in these cases, there's been a couple people sort of kicking tires on this. What I've advised is that they need to put their best foot forward. They need to really make a formal request in terms of a letter, and they need to demonstrate to council how their subdivision continues or does meet sort of the current development standards and needs of the local municipalities. Things like stormwater management and servicing, things of that nature that really are imperative. So the onus is really on landowners to come forward and then demonstrate how their subdivision is still warrants another chance. Okay, that brings us to a couple of items that I think require a little bit more detail. The first one is additional residential units. So these changes in Bill 23 are now requiring every municipality to allow up to 3 residential units per lot, 1 primary dwelling, and then the possibility for an accessory unit within that primary dwelling and a second accessory unit in a outbuilding or accessory building. So that is effective immediately. And what that means is that regardless of whether or not we've updated our zoning or official plan policies to align with this, a building permit for that couldn't be denied. And the things that planners and building officials right now are trying to manage or compensate for, I guess would be another way to put it, is that one of the requirements is that you, as a municipality, we can't force them to have more than one additional parking space per unit. And so that's going to work okay on some sites and not on others. So the question is, what mechanisms do we use to figure this out and enforce it in some way that's going to really result in the functionality of an individual site. So what happened earlier today was we did have a workshop with building officials, planning and building officials throughout the county, and we also had attendance from the city of Stratford, and we worked together to really identify what are the questions that these changes leave us with, what are the challenges that they're going to result in, and how can we address those through other mechanisms. And really, the focus of our meeting, or the tone of our workshop today, was let's not spend energy trying to figure out like how to circumvent this stuff. Let's figure out what mechanisms do we have that we can use, that we can put in place to, and really at the end of the day, ensure that sites with additional residential units are quite functional and working in concert with neighboring properties. And the same focus, the same, I would say, intention also we use to discuss site plan control today. So this is the second piece that requires a little more detail. So on the screen right now is a list of things that site plan control is used to regulate. And again, the purpose of site plan control and regulating these things is to ensure that the site functions really well and that it is compatible with neighboring uses. So the changes arising from Bill 23 are that site plan control no longer applies to residential developments of 10 or less units. So we had previously exempted residential units of 2 or less. So what we're really talking about is developments where there is anywhere from 2 to 10 residential units proposed on a site. And how will we then ensure that these things that we used to do under site plan control are addressed? And then the other thing that this bill changes is that regardless of the type of use, so whether it's residential or commercial or industrial, what have you, that we're no longer able to regulate architecture and landscaping external to the building. And sometimes that's really important when it comes to compatibility in particular. So this one is, I mean, both of these are a little bit frustrating because we had just written and we're working on intensification guidelines, for instance, for residential uses. And the whole premise there is that design really does help to achieve compatibility and to help with the intensification of some of our service settlement areas in a way that's pleasant and fits into the community. So these are the two changes that we are faced with. And as I said, we met earlier today to try and look at how will we achieve these things, or the majority of these things, using other mechanisms to help ensure the functionality of sites and compatibility with neighboring sites. So what I highlighted for you here is some of the things that we can sort of shift to zoning bylaw. The building code has some means of capturing and potentially implementing or beefing up a building bylaw. So in our group discussion today, we went through this list and really tried to nail down, what do we already have a tool that exists for, or for landscaping or planting strips, for instance, like we can address those kinds of things in a zoning bylaw, but we should go back and pull out those provisions and definitions and make sure that they are suited for this purpose. Now the site plan is not going to be there. And then there was a few things that we really felt we needed to explore and research and figure out if there's another means or some way that we can address. And so I'm going to show you what they are with these red highlights. So stormwater management items, landscaping, planting, strips, and fencing. Again, I think we can go to the zoning bylaw, but we need to do a bit of thinking and really make sure that we've covered as many bases as possible in the zoning bylaw for those things. Outdoor lighting, I think, will be a challenge, and parking to some degree we can deal with through zoning. So we're going to do our best there to come up with additional provisions or changes to the existing provisions and definitions to make sure that's covered. Things like accessibility, pedestrian access, we can address some of those things with subdivision. The challenge is certainly in existing neighborhoods and older neighborhoods. So redevelopment projects and new greenfield developments are going to be easier to manage certainly than existing sites or infills. Those are going to be require some of these areas in green and areas in the red ovals to really be addressed. So what we've done as a group is sort of divvied up the work here, and we've agreed to meet back in a couple of weeks to discuss the potential solutions and how they might work here in Perth County for each of the lower tiers. I added a bit to the slide as well about the architecture and landscaping. There are a few exemptions with respect to that. So if there is a health and safety or accessibility reason or sustainable design, I'm going to give you a couple examples on these things. One would be an example given at our workshop today was the type of materials used on the outside of a building, and there being case work or case studies in the past of them being sort of fire accelerants or an issue or concern of safety. And for those, we can, in that case, perhaps regulate some architectural details through these exemptions. Accessibility, certainly that's a little more self-explanatory. Sustainable design, I think, and the group just discussed today, like we may need some policies around sustainability, sustainable design or green design that we could use to rely on or justify an exemption that we wanted to deal with through site plan control. So that gives you a little bit more detail on the continued work that we're doing on site plan control and additional residential units specifically, and how we're working with building officials. Because I think really what a lot of this boils down to is that planning mechanisms or planning tools are being removed. And what that does is it shifts the responsibility or the focus or the issues, the resulting issues perhaps, onto building officials and enforcement staff. So as a group today, we discussed, like, let's use our energy to focus on collectively figuring out how to use these changes in our communities, and in doing so, we'll maybe, we may very well see an increase in affordable housing units, an increase in density, and those are things that we were striving for. So there's potentially some really good outcomes here, and we really need to use our energy to focus on the tools and mechanisms and means by which we can achieve them in our rural municipalities. And as I said, I think it's important that as this goes on, that we monitor the toll that it may take on building departments or on bylaw enforcement, and try to look for ways to revisit possible tools if necessary. Like, we may have to tweak things as we go along here, as different patterns arise through these changes. And then finally, top of mind for me in particular, I mean, the planners in our team and the building officials are really focused on some of the site plan stuff, and the official plan is really top of mind for me because I believe out of these changes that the next step is going to be changes to the provincial policy statement. And I think that will translate into edits or rewriting of sections that we've worked really hard to develop to date for the draft OP. So the question in my mind is, when are we going to see those changes, and how will they, what will the timelines look like in comparison to the plans that we have this year for reviewing a draft of the OP with committees and then going to public consultation? So we'll see. Time will tell on that. And that's the end of my slides for you all. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you a little better. And I'm willing to, or able certainly to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Sally. Any questions of the report? Amanda?
Two questions. Just circling back on, I think it was like the first slide, you talked about the scope of conservation authorities. So they can no longer comment on minor variances. But I understand that there is one conservation authority in our watershed that is still attempting to do that, and is using a 500-year-old flood plan map. I just wanted to see if you have heard, got that feedback on your end, on the planning end, and if you know which conservation authority I'm referring to.
I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you actually, but I think the question was specific to minor variances and conservation authority commenting on those. If I got that correct?
Now, Sally?
Yeah, much better. Thanks.
Yes?
Yep, much
Okay,
better.
so my question was regarding, given the province's limiting the scope of conservation authorities to their core mandate, they're no longer able to comment on minor variances, correct?
They can comment on flood and erosion hazards. They cannot comment on any other subject area like natural heritage, for instance.
So my understanding is we have a conservation authority in our watershed that is still attempting to make comments on things that are outside of this new scope outlined by the province. Has that been brought to your attention?
Well, I haven't seen any letters like that, but if they exist, we would take their hazard comments and run with those.
Okay.
I mean, we just simply follow the legislation as written. So they can write a letter with many other things in it, and the piece that we're obliged to follow is the hazard comments.
So I guess my question is, if there is pushback from any of the conservation authorities in our watershed, it wouldn't hold up a process. Because you would just strictly look at what their what the mandate that the province has outlined, correct?
Yeah, we wouldn't have any reason or cause to hold something up for subject matter other than hazards.
Okay, I will maybe touch base with you offline on
Sure.
A situation that was sort of brought to my attention on a conservation authority that's in our watershed that
Okay.
it sounds like it's something that is outside of the new scope that's been outlined.
Okay.
So I just wanted to chat briefly on that. And the second point is it wasn't covered in the presentation, and I don't know if you can speak to it, but I understand like there's is there new guidance on a push for looking at brownfield sites to encourage, looking at those sites for housing? My understanding that is the case, and if so, is there any lands within the township of Perth East that would be, I'm sort of putting you on the spot, so we can certainly circle back on that, but just didn't know if you could speak to
brownfield sites specifically as it relates to looking at innovative ways for housing?
Well, I think the opportunity to redevelop a brownfield site has always existed, and it's just challenging and cost prohibitive in some cases. But there's mechanisms and tools and regulation in place to explore that. And I don't think that has changed. What will be interesting is whether or not the PPS and any changes to that provide any more encouragement in that way, or whether or not there is some change under a different act that maybe incentivizes that in some way. Because as I said, I think the mechanisms exist for that to occur. It's just very time consuming and cost heavy. But I think, I mean, I've kind of been looking for somebody to do some of that. So I don't think that there's any change on that.
I understood that there was, but I could be mistaken.
Well, if you can find, if there's a specific reference, I'd be happy to look into it for you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, Jerry?
Yeah, we all realize there's been a number of municipalities, cities that have sent letters with the asking for changes up to, I think your comments, Sally, that, hey, let's work with it. Let's work with what we have. The chance that the province is going to do anything is probably slim. I like the point about, so for the public meeting, you suggested that the developer hold the public meeting. So I really like that. What, and is that something we can put in this policy? And the second part of it is, when do you think that, the report will come to council about the public meeting process?
Okay, so two questions there. One, can we put into policy that it's the developer's responsibility to hold some type of information session or open house? At this point, I don't think we can regulate that. The whole point of removing public meetings from the Planning Act was that that's no longer an extra step for subdivision approval. Now, what we can possibly regulate is doing it in-house still. So, we would go above and beyond the Planning Act, which doesn't require it, but that doesn't mean that we can't do it. So what we're trying to do is really evaluate what can be gained by continuing to do it, and if we're going to, what parameters will we put to it? Would it look just like it did before these changes, or would there be some other means or ways that we could sort of reinvent that process? And so I do think it's going to take me a little bit of time to explore that properly. I have put my mind to, like, what applications do we have in the queue right now that this will affect? There is 2 subdivisions that come to mind that are relatively new, both in Perth East, in fact, that we will be having public meetings for the official plan amendments that are associated with those, and then subsequently zoning. So there will be public meeting components to those developments. And if someone chose to come and speak at the official plan public meeting, for instance, we wouldn't refuse them from making a comment. Like, they would make a comment potentially on a street layout or something that we couldn't ignore. But at the same time, there is nothing stopping members of the public subdivision and submitting their comments to us, and they would be fully reviewed. We would if we just received them out of the blue, we would just get in touch with them and try to go through them. And just as we do on consent applications right now, we circulate the application. We look for reasons from the public that we need to engage further with them. And when we get comments on a consent to them and say, okay, tell me more about your concerns. How can, and then we work with the developer to try and resolve those things. So that at the point that we're making any recommendation to council, we can say these concerns were raised. The developer did X, we did Y, these ones were resolved, these ones are outstanding. Because we couldn't come to any resolve on them. And these are the things that we tried. So that process still exists for a subdivision. And so it's very true that there's still a public engagement process. What would be missing would be a public forum where someone could come, hear what the planner is saying, and then immediately following that, comment to the planning authority on what they think about this application. So it requires a little more work on their part to learn about the subdivision and then submit their comments. So I think there's a lot there to process and to figure out before we look for ways to. I don't think that having a public meeting or continuing to have them through some other policy is not circumventing the changes in Bill 23. It's just, before we take that step, we want to be certain that going above and beyond is what we need to do here.
Okay, other questions, Hugh?
Yeah, Sally, on page 109 of your report, there says there's a removal of a 2-year moratorium on OPAs for new official plan zoning bylaws and minor variances. So have we been operating under that for the last 2 years?
Well, we don't have a new official plan yet. But one of the things that was in place up until this change was that, I'm going to give you a hypothetical. So say we had a new OP next month. Then the Planning Act would say that no one can apply for an official plan amendment to that new plan for 2 years, unless County Council passed a resolution that they would allow it. And now the Planning Act just removes that activity entirely and just says anyone can apply for an official plan at any point.
Okay, Andrew?
Thank you, Mayor. It's Deputy Mayor McDermott stole one of my questions, so I only have 2 now. and nothing too earth-shattering or detailed needed. Is it, and I've looked through all the documents, starting on 108, it looks like a lot of work. I'm glad you guys are having time to get to it. Is there been any number thrown out from the province or any indication of you shall build 500 homes or 300 homes or multi-mix residential number? Is there a quota that they're throwing out for rural municipalities to do any home building other than normal?
Not that I've seen. There is a requirement, though, that in our official plan, we set targets for intensification, targets for density, and affordable and attainable units. Our current OP doesn't have strong targets or hard like around density. It has sort of density suggestions for the different. Yeah, rather than like a hard line whereby, you know, if you're reviewing a subdivision, you could say, well, this proposal doesn't meet our requirement for density in a medium density zone. So no, that's a reason not to approve it or to send them back to like try again. And so that's why we, in the new official plan, are writing it with more firm language. And that is a requirement of the PPS now too, that you do it that way.
Thanks for clarifying that. There's kind of, word would be panic or misinformation, but there seems to be some out there. The second thing I have is boundary expansion. No, it kind of was touched on the 2-year moratorium. And then on page 148, that's all I have for our PE thing in the document from the province that was part of your presentation. Residential land supply, it's a settlement area boundary expansions. It just kind of gives a word salad of what they're thinking. So through our official plan and anything, has there been any changes to that? Is it still only during official plan review period that you can do expansion? I don't know if that's a regular OPA, or how does that work? Has there been changes to that?
The comprehensive review requirements have not changed as a result of Bill 23. So in order to expand a boundary, you first need to justify your land needs based on your growth projections and your current inventory. That's the same as it was before. And those are the activities that we're going through right now in order to determine the proposed growth areas in the new official plan. And also the PPS directs that those growth areas be adjacent to service settlement boundaries. And so what will any changes to the PPS say? I have no idea yet. I'm looking at the same, as you say, word salad as you are.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing no questions, we have a motion that the Council of the Township of Perth East receive the implementation update report, legislative changes of Bill 109 and Bill 23 report prepared by the Perth County Manager of Planning Services dated January 10, 2023 for information. Moved by Hugh, second by Amanda. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. Thanks, Sally.
You're welcome.
Okay, now we're going to move to the CAO, and we have the Shakespeare Water EA. Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Eggetts. Yeah, the report is in front of council as it relates to kind of follow-up piece and the intent to move forward as it relates to preferred alternative selection for the Shakespeare Water. So the report, we tried to capture information and provide the feedback that was received from the open house that was hosted in Shakespeare. As well, we've tried to move forward as it relates to the financial implications associated with each of the preferred options that have been presented to council. Really, the report, the intent is to hopefully convey that depending upon the option selection, it creates a different base as it relates to who the benefiting property owners will be. So basically, starting at the 248 number, which is basically a combination of the 160 existing connected properties and the 88 that still exist within the existing capacity of the water system in Shakespeare, and then moving up to the 436, which would be able to be serviced if there was any type of expansion as it relates to reservoir at the site itself. So creating that additional capacity allows for more benefiting customers, which allows for more breakdown of the cost amongst all of those 436 as opposed to it being limited to the 248. So I recognize there's a lot of numbers as it relates to, in particular, the third attachment to the report. We also wanted to try to provide a little bit of guidance to council around the funding options that exist to also reduce the impact of the project on any of the benefiting property owners. The water reserve funds is an option. We provided kind of the background as it relates to what the basis of that reserve fund is. The current balance is about 1.45 million. The idea of potentially an infrastructure loan or debenture allowing us to expand the length of the term around collection of those costs to match the loan period in potential, given that the assets that we're building is going to have a long lifespan. I don't think it's inappropriate to consider debenturing or a loan for portions of the costs. Obviously, the development charges, if council chooses one of the options that allows for potential growth beyond that 160 and 88 number, it would open up the idea that the developers or those properties that are part of that development would be they would become benefiting property owners, and that they would pay those costs around that expansion. Those expansion costs would not have any impact on the current people that are connected to the system or those that aren't connected to the system. It would be just those that come in the future after the fact that connect, they would be benefiting, and then they would pay those costs at that point. So that was the intent of kind of the overview of the report. I'll maybe get Matt to scroll down to the third attachment and try to walk through that to a certain degree. So yeah, the upper portion really is just kind of to encapsulate the overall funding implications. So the project estimate for treatment is that 1.975 number. We've got approved funding of about 1.45. That creates a funding gap there. Within that approved funding, we have a portion to pay in there. That's that 386 number. So really the current treatment costs, net of the grant costs, are that 911 number. So that's kind of the starting point as it relates to trying to capture costs. The box to the right of that one, you see the cost of treatment, that 911 number. We've estimated the cost for growth, so that would be going to one of the other options, 2C or 2D, would be at that 385 piece. And then the cost for fire, depending upon the sizing of the reservoir and the pumps, that either becomes that 250 number or that 490 number on option 2D. So the next table, I think, is the key one, and maybe people will dispute, but it's trying to allocate those costs. And this does not reflect us as a council or as a staff or as Perth East tapping into reserve funds, debenturing. This is just kind of the total costs as it relates to the property. So the 160 current properties, because we're limiting it just to that 160 and 88 in option 2A, with the costs associated with those properties would be just over 3,600. Moving over to 2B, because we're creating some more capacity, that would be that 2,000 number. 2C is that 2459, and again 2D goes up to the 2844. That's for the existing 160 connected. The 88 is the existing capacity within the water system, and again their cost would be aligned with that 160. And choosing one of the options around 2B, that 188 are future connections that are eligible to connect because we choose to allow for some growth within the system, and 2B, 2C, or 2D, and their costs are more. They get the benefit of treatment, but they are solely responsible for the growth costs. So they're at 41, 45, and 4,800. And then the private well and settlement areas, and this is based on a very broad assumption right now that council would decide that if they choose to go with 2C or 2D, that they would allocate the costs around the fire piece to those all the properties within the settlement boundary. That's a very broad assumption right now. I think there's lots of options that council might consider, whether or not they want to debenture that, whether they want to reflect that as a fire capital budget piece to be captured over a 5-year period as an example, or whether they want to look at fire capital reserves to offset some of those costs. I think those are things that are still up in the air in terms of consideration. So that's the kind of the table to try and give the indications around the current cost breakdown and what the impacts would be on the different connection types that exist within Shakespeare.
Okay, questions? Jeremy?
Yeah, Mike, on the bottom of PAE 166, I'm fairly certain I asked the question at a prior meeting about dipping into capital reserve for the water. And I think the answer was that we couldn't do that. But what I'm seeing here is Shakespeare is paying 18 to 19, just to understand it correctly, Shakespeare is paying 18 to 19% into the capital for water. So reasonably, we would take that much out. We could take more out, we could take less out, we could take none out, but that's approximately what's going in there because it's all part of one fund with Milverton and Shakespeare together. So we could use some of the reserve, but only for current connections and not for new connections?
That would be absolutely my recommendation for council, is that the current reserve is based on funds that we are collecting for the current connections. So that, any dollars that we would use from that should benefit those current connections. And yeah, that's why I included that portion right from our reserve policy in the background to the report as it relates to the utilization. There is discretion around that, but it certainly would be my recommendation that if we're gonna use water reserves, that we would look at 18% of that, basically 1.4 million, and say that, yeah, that could be part of this project for the benefiting customers, the existing ones, that 160. Thank you. Sure.
Okay. Hugh?
Yeah, I noticed that there was a comment there that the sheets that they got in Shakespeare, that they would be destroyed. But being as this is an EA and stuff like that, do you not have to keep all that stuff?
The short answer is no, based on my conversations with the project engineers.
Okay.
Okay, other questions? Amanda?
Not captured here, so I, putting you on the spot a little bit, Mike, but just to preface this by saying this is a big issue, and I know it's really, contentious. Some of the comments that have been discussed about, and I did receive one call, even though this is not in my ward area, from private well owners. And so I really want to make sure that it's crystal clear. I think people are worried about being forced to hook up to municipal system. And so how do we, so there's that, the municipal, the private well owners, how do we treat them? And the other thing is, I think, the common question that people want to know is, how much do they have to pay per household to hook up? Because I think I'm just sensitive with, balancing the needs of, trying to, address the core issue while planning ahead, while also being sensitive to the fact that, people are really struggling right now. And I think we need to be very sensitive to that. And so, whatever decision we come up with as a council, we have to be able to sell and justify that. And so I don't know if you can speak to the well ownership piece and how we are going to be handling that. I just really want to be crystal clear on that and have some sort of this, that I can point to that, hey, this is what we're doing, and it's in writing for people. I don't know if that's, I know it's sort of separate to this, but it's also a big issue that's been talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Councilor Broadhang. I'm working under the assumption and the direction of council that there's no intentions of forcing people who are connected to wells to connect to the water system, that they want to remain on private wells. That's their right, and that's been the direction I've been given since I got here. And I have no intentions of straying from that. I think if council wants us to send written notice to the 248 private wells in Shakespeare, indicating that there's no requirement to connect to the system, I don't have strong feelings about not doing that, because that's been the direction I've been working under since I got here. Yeah, if others are feeling different about that around this horseshoe, that would be news to me, because I think that's what we've all kind of been working towards, that, yeah, there's no intention to force the people who are on private wells to connect to the water system. The one thing I would say about that is that creating capacity has the potential, and I'm not an advocate. I'm just trying to make the case and provide information. There are circumstances where someone on a private well may want to connect, and I don't think we should say they can't. So, if we don't, we have to balance that at some point too. And there are circumstances that may happen in the future where 10 years down the road, somebody may want to connect to the municipal water system. And if we don't have capacity, then we're gonna have to create capacity in that circumstance, potentially. I don't have a crystal ball, and none of us do, and I understand that. But the short answer is, I have no intention, and I don't believe council has any intention of forcing people on private wells to connect to the municipal water system.
I think what I'm more so getting at is, you know, I don't want to, in 4 years' time, there might be a different council around this chamber, okay? And so I think, we're operating under certain assumptions today. Sending out a notice is, today, you know what I mean? It's not, 6 years from now or whatever. So what, could it be an emotion? Like, could it be, like, how can we give them reassurance that we're not going to compel them to do it, but there's certainly the option if they voluntarily want to hook up? Like, what mechanism, what could we do as a council today, potentially, to address that issue from the public? What would you recommend?
So it's a fair question. It's maybe not a fair answer, because you as a council today, as you've indicated, you may not be here in 4 years, and circumstances may change that none of us are aware of around that. Passing a motion today saying that, yes, we have no intentions of connecting, I think is fair. You could do that. But for us, myself included, any of us, to suggest that we know what may happen 10, 15 years from now, and suggest to any property owner that we have the authority to say circumstances won't change, I think it's misleading. I think we can pass a resolution as a council, if you choose that, to say that we have no intentions during this term of council or at any term that we are part of to force connection from private wells. But to say that that's in perpetuity, I don't think we have the legal right to actually say that, to be honest. A bylaw could be passed, a bylaw could be rescinded by a future council, a resolution could be reconsidered by a future council. I don't know what the mechanism would look like, to be honest, Councillor Rodhagen.
Fair.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, Andrew?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Eggetts. So I guess I appreciate the comments so far. They're remarkably in tune with the feeling on the ground in the village of Shakespeare. I guess just a 436 number, CO Gibbons, it kind of looks like that includes all the well owners, just optically. I think I've asked about to pass a bylaw, a zoning bylaw or whatever to protect this and get rid of this item. I think it's probably wise, no matter what we do tonight, that also be added. It's not so much of a question, but I was going to ask that question anyway, so I might as well ask it again. So the future growth is mentioned on page 156. Now, when we entered this, we heard from the consultants and through both EAs. Actually, we did a second EA because it's not about growth, but now we're openly saying, and I'm glad we're getting to that point where we're openly saying it's about growth. So I'm concerned we need to separate this, and you'll notice from my questions to planning staff about boundary expansion. So I guess my question is will any items on this list, any selection tonight, and I'm not advocating for any or anything farther than that, will any of those affect the current OPA intake for settlement boundary expansion, with especially those 436 capacity numbers?
I think it would be fair to say, and I'm going out a little bit on a limb here, Councillor McAlpine, that if council chooses not to acknowledge the 438, that the idea of any boundary expansion in Shakespeare will end in this iteration of the official plan.
Okay, other questions? Amanda?
Or just one more question, and I apologize, Mike. I just, again, just so I'm crystal clear, because this is a big decision, so looking at the chart, so 2A, basically, if we went with 2A, hypothetically, there would be no opportunity for a later date for us to expand.
I appreciate that question because it helps me clarify my last comment, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this. What I want to capture this appropriately. It would make the idea of boundary expansion more challenging, not impossible, and it will not change the province's opinion that growth should occur in areas that are serviced. It will not change that. It may increase the costs associated with allowing for growth in Shakespeare if it is forced upon us in one shape or form, but it would make it more challenging because we wouldn't have that capacity. So when I say it would end it, that's overstepping my statement. What I'm saying is it would make it more challenging for a boundary expansion. I believe, and this is my belief, and just based on what I'm seeing, you guys are seeing the same thing that I am seeing. The province expects all of us, rural, urban, small, large, to play a role in the housing shortfall that exists in this province. Whether we agree with that or not is not, I'm not here to debate that with anyone. It's an expectation. It's clear what they're doing with the bills that they're passing, Bill 23 and Bill 109, are all about addressing getting 1.5 million houses built in the next 10 years. What mechanisms they will continue to provide or promote or enforce on municipalities, I don't know that. But it will not change the expectation that I believe that they have on all of us that we're gonna play a part in addressing the housing shortfall.
Okay, I have a question on the chart when we're on the chart, and then I'll come back to you, Andrew. Just so clarification here, on 2A, it shows a potential of 248 connections, and it says cost per connection is $3,674.54. That's per house, is that correct?
That's per connection.
Per connection, but
Correct.
only those 160 and the 88.
Correct.
If I go down the chart to scenario 4, 2C, it says $369.82. That's per house, correct? But that's the current owners, all the well owners, and the future connections, but they only pay $369. Am I reading this correctly?
Correct, if the option to allow for capacity for fire suppressant was selected, correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm reading the chart correctly.
And yeah, to that point, that's assuming that we don't look at other funding avenues associated with that part of the project, which I believe that we should. It's just we haven't got there yet because we haven't made the decision around the preferred alternative.
Okay, questions, Jeremy? Oh, Andrew, I'll let Andrew go first, and then Jeremy.
No, thank you, Mayor Eggets. So I guess another question that I'm getting, and Councillor Broadhagen kind of opened the door for that one, was you can see the probable cost here goes up and up and up to 3 million CO Givens. So that'll be existing users, some future users. Would it be not good because it looks like we know this is now expandable 2A, for example, and it has that 248 number. If it will constrict the development, then maybe that will get the developer to pay for all this growth instead of the taxpayer and the local residents. So that strategy seems to be good for everybody, and all that cost will be put into the new homes as any other, subdivision type items go, right? And they can connect to whatever system. I think there's pipes near everywhere where there would be connection. So that would be Would that be possible, that we allow this to be paid for, all the growth to actually be paid for by growth? Because that's been the mantra as long as I've been here, is growth pays for growth, you know? So it should be fully, though.
I'm 100% in agreement that growth pays for growth, and that's why you look at 2B and 2C and 2D, the figures associated with growth are significantly more than the existing properties that can be serviced. And that was our focus, and when we were going through the costs, is to make sure that growth is not only paying for the benefit of the treatment, but they're paying for the growth part of it too. So that's why when you look at that 188 number in 2B, 2C, 2D, they're paying a significantly larger amount than the existing connected and the future connections that exist within the current capacity.
So-
But the concept, absolutely, and to your initial point, Councilor McAlpine, yeah, moving to the alternate site, the site has capacity itself from a land standpoint. And I think what you're suggesting is, hey, in the future, if 10 years down the road, Joe rolls into town and he wants to build 400 homes, then Joe is building the new capacity on that site. It's a different way to look at it, absolutely.
Yeah, if we've got the potential there, but the appropriate person's gonna pay for it. So just, I think you briefly spoke to it, and if I may, just another quick question. So, say the difference goes up and up in the total project cost, you know, say 2C got selected, or 2B, so that's gonna be built, that 2.6 million, hoping the economy doesn't jack that through the roof in the next 2 weeks. With the recession coming. But so who's going to take care of that carrying costs for all that money until Joe Blow comes along and wants to? I imagine there's probably people listening to this meeting right now waiting to see what's going to happen so they can develop. But who's going to, is the taxpayer going to be on the hook for those carrying costs, or will that be factored into added to the connection fee?
My intention, the carrying costs associated with the growth portion would stay with the growth. We're trying to absolutely look at ways to limit the financial impact on the existing connections and the 88 that exist within the capacity. So any costs associated with the debenturing associated, if that was the route we decided to go, which would be one of my recommendations, that in particular the growth portion would be debentured, we would either find a way to negotiate recouping all of those costs with the developer or amend our development charges so it allows us to capture both the principal and the interest associated with that. We really, and I think the rest of the staff will agree, the focus when, you know, I forced them to sit down with me and go over this is we're trying to make sure that growth pays for the growth portion. If we're gonna go that route, that's makes the most sense. We're supportive of that. Nobody has tried to stray that. We're trying to limit the impact as much as we possibly can on the existing connections and the connections that we can service without any expansion. And by creating a larger number, economies of scale are economies of scale, that helps, but also focusing the costs on those growth connections helps as well. I'm not disputing the costs go up depending upon the different scenarios, Councilor McAlpine. Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, just one more follow-up. I apologize. So Bill 23 is going to affect development charges for intensified, I don't know what the right word is. So we had I heard briefly in the conversation that we would use development charges to pay for some of this. I don't think we can really, because nobody's going to build. It just we're not going to be building single-family homes that not too many people are. There may be, but I doubt it. So we're not going to get those development charges. We can't expect that, right? I'm just wondering how the numbers were formulated. Were they formulated with development charges in mind, or was that a possibility later down the line? Because it's going to be, as you said, the province wants houses, right? So
I maybe misunderstood. No one's going to build houses? Is that what you said?
I mean, single-family houses will be probably less desirable from a profit standpoint, I imagine, for the builder. That's what they're telling me. And, right?
I would dispute that to a certain degree. I think the majority of builders still prefer to build single-family dwellings, and I believe that they could still make a profit at them. I think the requirements around density are going to change the layouts of subdivisions, but I think when there's still going to be a significant portion of single-family dwellings. As Sally indicated, manager of planning, there will be targets that Bill 23 will require as it relates to density requirements. So the developers were gonna have to meet those targets, but those targets have existed in other urban areas for many years already, and the developers are quite easily meeting those targets. I don't think this will, Bill 23 is gonna change the way growth looks. And the province is gonna look for ways to streamline the process and to reduce overall costs to developers. They've made that clear. But I do still believe the province acknowledges that services, in particular like water, sewer, are the responsibility of the developer.
Okay, Jeremy?
So looking at options 2B, C, and D, we could conceivably get some of those cost per connection down for the existing users or for future connections on the existing capacity by using that 19% as well as, like you spoke earlier, maybe fire reserve or stuff like that as well. So we could you could cut into the costs for the current users and for the future connections of the existing capacity without affecting future connection costs. We wouldn't have to incrementally bring those down as well.
That's my belief, is that we could focus on the existing connections because they're the ones that have contributed to the reserve.
They've paid that 20%. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Amanda?
Just a comment and a question for Bill. So just, this is where I'm sort of struggling with this. I think what's interesting about the legislation is if there is a section in the legislation, because it is an omnibus bill that talks about a particular region in the province, so York, where the province is compelling the region to pay for infrastructure. And so, the thought of, having the developer pay for the growth is, I think that's, a good concept, but in reality, there is hypothetically, we could get into a situation where we are compelled to make certain changes that could end up costing us more. So I'm bringing that forward for debate and discussion, for awareness that, that is currently in the legislation. For York Region, obviously that's a, urban area, and, obviously the province has very specific interests in, tackling those more urban areas. So there's some, obviously more challenges. And then my second question is for Bill, and just, obviously there is some options here that talk about fire, extra fire protection. And so what is your professional opinion on the risk if we were not to go with extra fire protection? Like what's, is there liability concerns? Like what are, like, just from your assessment, what are your thoughts on that? And again, I just want to make sure like I'm fully armed with all of the answers, because after tonight, like, we have to live with whatever decision we come up with as a council.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So the level of protection is established by council. So currently, Shakespeare is protected through water tanker shuttle. If council chooses to implement an option that doesn't include hydrants, then the current level would remain for Shakespeare. It's not, from a professional opinion, tanker shuttle is definitely not as effective as having a pressurized municipal fire system with fire hydrants. No argument whatsoever there. But yeah, bottom line, the service level is set by council, so it would just remain what it is today.
Okay, other questions? Andrew?
I was going to leave this until the question is on the floor, but maybe it's better in case staff wants to correct me or anything. So fire protection, great thing. It's, I really like the report from BM Ross. It consistently says, it's a great line. It makes a lot of sense. It says current system does not support fire hydrants. That's a factual, perfect statement. It doesn't support fire hydrants. Councillor Broadhagen's question kind of got to the root of the matter, which is, do we need fire hydrants? So I'm not an expert, not even close to even standing near the shoes, let alone in the shoes of Chief Hunter. But you know, the Fire Act. Not that I don't know if you've been working lately too much. I don't want to get into shoes. But so the Fire Act of Ontario, it clearly states that education and prevention, and there's a whole bunch of items that are secondary to suppression, right? Suppression is there, but there's the top three, and I see Bill nodding his head, and that's just the way it works. You guys do a great job with all this stuff and stop the fire from happening. If we have a fire, it's not a failure, but it's a negative outcome like you would have seen in, say, Tavistock when the one house burnt to the ground and there's a fire hydrant on the neighboring lawn, right? So it's not a guarantee of doing it. And if we're looking at, so if we equate that to the kind of the third place of fire protection, and we equate the costs we're seeing, which I can't see, I don't have my glasses on, the higher costs. So we have something that's great but may not be needed, and it's a higher cost. Again, Councillor Broadhagen had that we may be saddling ourselves with costs for the higher value system. You know, sure, we could have a splash pad in every corner and an ice cream stand, right? It's not going to help safety, but you know, I think in the current economic climate, a frugal approach is probably best in this instance. So that was the thing, is the BM Ross reports actually state the current system does not support fire hydrants. And if we're looking at that and people have been looking at that saying, oh, we're in trouble, right? We're not in trouble. We have a great fire department. I contacted my insurance after a lot of people said I should, a local mutual, which does very well. We get dividends, so I guess it's a good company to be part of. And I will not get any increase in insurance or decrease in insurance rate. They do it, they kind of described it like MDS. They put a pin in it and everybody within 8 kilometers gets that fabulous rate, right? So I'm not too worried, me personally, living in the area, that there's a concern about those two items. It seems that it would be nice to have maybe in 10 years when I'm long gone. 10 years, that's not very long. That's maybe some people wish it was sooner, but then maybe, you know, it might be warranted, you know, to do that, the fire system. But I would like to see us keep this frugal, and I think the fire component of it was extremely valuable, and the opinions of our fire department are always valued. I think it's maybe a little bit too early for that cost, for the benefit. So that's.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, if we have no questions, then we have some options. So we can go with 2A. We have 2 scenarios for 2B. We have 4 scenarios for 2C and 4 scenarios for 2D. So who wants to move what? Hugh?
I would move 2A only because I think that there's a lot there. It's very good, but I, again, as Councillor McAlpine said, don't want to really saddle the municipality at this time with a lot of extra costs, and secondly, the development charges and things like that. Like, a lot of that stuff is up in the air.
Let's get a seconder before you give all your reasons,
okay.
okay?
Sure.
So you're moving to A. Do we have a seconder? Andrew? Okay, now I'll go back to you, Hugh. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. No, I just think that it would be better not to be taking on very much debt at the moment. The economy is very bizarre, and I would not want us to see take on extra money that we would have to service until a possible future time that we could maybe possibly recoup the money, which is not anymore guaranteed that we're going to get that money. That's all.
Okay, anyone else want to make comments? Andrew?
Thank you, Mayor Agat. So 2A, if we look at the survey, we never really spent a lot of time on that. The first one, number 1, Miller, which is off the table now, it looks like. It's the same cost, the same basic setup as the first 2 ones. Sorry, this is such a new site. I'm a little trying to get familiar with it. So site 1 at Miller is the same as 2A, which has been moved. Basically, same cost, same amenities, and it looks like arguably, well, not arguably, factually, that this event we put on in Shakespeare said we want site number 1. So this is the most similar thing to that, and I think that with the petition, with the 2 EAs that came out, all had the same vein in it from the ratepayers in the area, and I think that that's probably the most reasonable, and adding the financial stipulation from Deputy Mayor McDermott, I think it's wise. It is expandable, so we're not stopping anything from happening. We're just going to it sounds like we're just going to transfer that securely to the developers where it should be.
Anyone else with questions? Bob?
I heard Andrew say that it was, I guess, the majority that supported option 1 by the, so I guess since it's a user pay system, I kind of filtered through the comments, and if they weren't connected to this system, I didn't really have any merit to those points because it's a user pay system. So I just filtered through those comments, and the majority were actually in favor of site 2C or 2D. I think that's summarized in the report as well. So again, just want to clarify that if you're going by a survey, or those who chose to attend, well aware that there was no mandate for any connection, and it is a user pay system, that those that commented chose not site 1, not site 2A or B, but 7 and 8, or 7 and 3, I guess, made comments for C and D. Just to clarify.
Okay, anyone else with questions? Andrew?
If it's okay, I would like to respond to the comments about the question, or comment about my comment. Is that okay, or would you like everybody else to go ahead?
Is there anyone else first? Jerry?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Agatz. Andrew made the comment about the future connection, so option 2A only provides for the 88 that are within. I'm about growth. We need growth. It's something we need. The province has said it. We're doing it. We need the growth, so I can't support 2A. It sounds like perhaps I could be swayed towards 2B without the fire suppression, without the hydrants, but obviously I don't live in Shakespeare, but if I lived in Shakespeare, I would want a fire hydrant. And with 2D, that's the one that I would probably go with, but 2B would be my preferred option, but I can't support 2A.
Okay, anyone else with questions, comments? Then Andrew, I'll let you have the final one, and we're going to vote.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you, Council, for letting me speak again to this important thing. So we duly elected council, Councilor McMillan offered this survey in this form to get a poll of what the feeling on the community was. Am I correct? Or that's what the intent was. We've got the results. I'm not sure how I didn't see that, how we can filter well owners, beyond well owners unless they said they were. I guess it summarized it at the end. I'm not sure how they did that, maybe by IP address, so there's another box on here, but
One of these two comment.
on one of these ones, okay.
Yes or no, why?
So regardless, it is the survey, we can't discount something that we put in place, right? I won't discount it, it's the fourth time we went back and got the same answer. So that's all I'm saying is the development thing is a different conversation to be had at a different time. We need to get the arsenic fixed, and if we can somehow, looks like we're gonna build something expandable with 2A, let's keep the cost down and build 2A.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and it says the Council of the Township of Perth East received the report entitled Shakespeare Water EA Public Forum Open House Follow-Up dated January 10, 2023, prepared by the Chief Administrative Officer, Manager of Public Works and Parks, Treasurer and Operations Coordinator for Information, and that Council approve option 2A as a preferred alternative and direct staff to proceed completion of the municipal class EA and design, and that council direct staff and project engineer to prepare a detailed costing, funding analysis for the preferred option, contemplating financial implications on benefiting properties and respective budgets. So now we're going to vote. All those in favor of 2A? Those opposed? Defeated.
Recorded vote, please.
Okay. We'll go around the table. Councillor McAlpine,
Yay.
Councillor Matheson,
Nay.
Deputy Mayor McDermott,
Yay.
Councillor Smith,
Nay.
Councillor McMillan,
Nay.
Councillor Broadhaken,
Nay.
and Mayor Egetts, nay. Okay, so does someone else, Amanda?
Like to make a motion that we move option 2C.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Do we have a seconder for that? Okay, second by Andrew. Okay, I'm not going to read the motion again. Is there any comments or questions? Jeremy?
Question to the mover, 2C versus 2D. Just curious of, why 2C versus 2D?
I think there isn't tons of difference between 2C, 2D, but I think it's the next best option in my view, and it still checks off all the boxes for me. Just that, keeping cost in mind, so that's why I'm moving that, but, I'm open to the other option 2D, but I think, option 2C is a good middle ground, and it still, checks off all the boxes that I think, that community needs.
Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, I'm not going to read it all again, but the option, I will read just part, that council approve option number 2C as the preferred alternative and direct staff to proceed completion of the municipal class EA and design. So now we're voting on 2C. All in favor of 2C? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so we're going with option 2C. Thanks, everyone. I know it's been a contentious topic, and we thank everyone for their diligence in looking into this matter. So we will move on now to the clerk, and we're going to, we have a request for repair and improvement. I think Eric is going to join us. There he is. Eric, good to see you. The floor is yours.
Good evening. Just making sure that council can hear me. Perfect. So yeah, this report is for a Section 78 request, which we received by Scott Campbell for the Western Municipal Drain. He's a property owner on Lot 37, Concession 6 in the Northeast Hope Ward. He's just simply looking to improve and modernize the Western Municipal Drain, specifically a branch that jets into the Stratford Municipal Airport. So we are just recommending that we go ahead with the next step in the process, which is notifying the Conservation Authority and then bringing it back to council.
Okay, questions for Eric? See no questions. We do have a motion that the Council of the Township of Perth East receive the request for repair and improvement, Section 78 of the Draining Act by property owner Scott Campbell for the Western Municipal Drain, Lot 37, Concession 6, Northeast Hope Ward, Township of Perth East for information, and that in accordance with Section 78 in brackets 2 of the Drainage Act, the appointment of an engineer will be considered at the February 7, 2023 regular council meeting, subsequent to the notice advising of the proposed drainage works being sent to the Secretary-Treasurer of the Conservation Authority that has jurisdiction over the lands in the affected area. We need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Bob, second by Jerry. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. Okay, thanks, Eric. And then we're going to move to the appointment of the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority and Asabo Bayfield Maitland Source Protection Committee. And Ashley, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Eggetts. The only comments I have for the report is that the other members for the Asabo Bayfield Maitland Valley Source Protection Committee, so the East Group, everyone else has approved Alan Rothwell as the representative. And then the second part, Maitland Valley Conservation Authority, that's joint with West Perth, and West Perth has appointed Andrew Fournier.
Okay, questions of the report? Seeing no questions, we have a motion that the Council of the Township of Perth East receive the appointment to the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority and Asabo Bayfield Maitland Valley Source Protection Committee report prepared by the municipal clerk dated January 10, 2023 for information, and that council supports the recommendation of Alan Rothwell for the Asabo Bayfield Maitland Valley Source Protection Committee for the 2022 to 2026 term of council, and that council supports the recommendation of Andrew Fournier to the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority for the 22 to 2026 term of council. A mover and a seconder, moved by Jeremy, second by Hugh. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. Okay, thank you. Now we'll move to the Finance and Cedarville Athletic Association. And Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Eggetts. Tonight, Council has before them a request from the Sebringville Athletic Association to modify the projects that were originally approved under their 2019 grant received from Council. The three original projects were tree removals, repairs to the pavilion roof, as well as playground replacement. When they went out for RFPs on the playground equipment, costing was higher than what they had thought. So they need to fundraise further in order to replace the full playground. Then COVID hit, everything shut down, usage changed. Now priorities have shifted, and the group is requesting to change the projects. They have completed the tree removal and the pavilion roof repair. It's that playground piece that they're asking to expand upon, and they're proposing a partial playground equipment replacement to extend the life of that equipment, as well as drainage repairs and fencing and turf repairs.
Thanks. Questions of the report? Do you know the drainage that they're going to do? Are they trying to fix something, or are they looking to put in a municipal drain? Do you know?
I actually reached out to Ken Wolf, the member on the Sebringville Athletic Association, for further clarification on the drainage work, and I have not heard back from him. And just for council's note, I did offer for them to be a delegation at this meeting, and I still haven't heard back from them. So.
Okay, Amanda?
Can we defer this until we get more information?
We could defer it, yes, if that's what council wishes.
I'll move that
Okay, so Amanda's moved to defer. Do we have a seconder? Hugh? Okay, so I'll read. The Council of Township of Perth East received the report dated January 20th, or excuse me, January 10th, 2023, entitled Stephenville Athletic Association, Inc., request to amend 2019 grant projects prepared by the treasurer for information, and that this report be deferred until further information received.
Just to clarify, what information is it that you're all wanting more on? Just the drainage? Just drainage?
Okay, any more comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. Okay, then we're going to, we have nothing for Public Works, nothing for Building and Bylaw. The next we have is Recreation and Community Services pre-budget approval perk. Becky, floor is yours.
Thanks, Mayor Rhonda. As some council members will recall, that we had a roof inspection completed in 2022. We did do some immediate repairs in 2022, but I did let council know at the time that there was going to be a need of replacements in some of the roof areas. That's shown in the report. The estimated cost of the roof repairs is $385,000. There's a number of reserves that we could take that from. The reason why it's coming as a pre-budget approval is right now, if we can get the tenders out early, we can get better pricing because the contractors are wanting to get projects on their books. And in the budget process would miss that opportunity. Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Okay, questions of the report? Jerry?
So you got the total amount there. Thanks, Mary. It's just a matter of, and you have a space there for the amount, so I'm presume.
Oh, and
Right, in the recommendation, that there's no number there. I presume we would do the full 385. It's just a matter of where we're taking the monies from.
correct.
So we only have 890 in the arena capital, so we don't really want to deplete that. So, yeah, I'm in favor of getting this done. It just, whatever my other council members wish to take the money from, or maybe a recommendation from the treasurer would help.
It is, Jerry, in the report from the Building Betterment, right? Okay. So who wants to move what? Andrew, you have a question, or you want to make?
No, just quick question. So do we put asset management, as we're taking asset management, I'm not sure how much this building costs here. I'm thinking like $90,000 or something. Is it going into building betterment, or where does asset management money go in for the bits and pieces along the way, as it was described to me by the previous treasurer? Does it go into that fund, or where does that end up?
No, I was just pulling up the reserve explanations so I can quickly go through. The building betterment is for corporate asset acquisition, replacement, and rehabilitation. And that is a TCA class reserve, discretionary. So TCA is a tangible capital asset, which is part of the asset management plan. And I'm just looking to see if there's any. The corporate reserve, which is another option, that is to fund capital projects or corporate deficits. And that's a TCA as well, a TCA class, discretionary.
So, sorry,
Yep.
Treasurer Michael, so the asset management contributions per year are going where, and can we use those for this project?
There is an asset, I'm just getting to the asset.
So I'm clear, you're asking if we can use the asset management money?
Yeah, previously, there was a discussion about that, and the statement, I remember it clearly, was it's for, we were thinking of not including that building in that procedure. And the response that I got, and it stuck with me, is that it's for the bits and pieces along the way, which would hopefully would include the roof on the building, right? So that's why I'm asking that maybe we have this other money that we can also, is available. But it may, regulation may have changed. I don't think our policy has, but
There, so Councilor McAlpine, there is the corporate asset reserve, and that's where the capital transfers for the asset management plan are going currently. And the current balance in there budgeted to end 2022 at 161,000. So, yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Okay, any more questions? And who wants to make what motion here? Jeremy?
The recommendation says to come from the Building Betterment Reserve, so I'll move that.
And the dollar amount?
The 385.
385, okay. So, and Amanda will second that. So the motion is that the Council of the Township of Perth East receive the pre-budget approval PERC roof replacement report prepared by the Recreation and Community Services Manager dated January 10, 2023 for information, and that Council approve $385,000 for the PERC roof replacement project be included in the 2023 Perth East capital budget, and the project be funded from the Building Betterment Reserves. Okay, any more comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. Okay, thanks, Becky. So we have no reports from fire. The next is our correspondence from John Kastner from the museum. Do you wish to receive his report for information? Okay, moved by Hugh, second by Bob. Any more comments or questions? Ashley?
So we'll forward this letter on to the Broxton School Committee as well, so they're aware. They haven't received this yet. He didn't address the letter to them at all. It was just to myself and council. So unless council wants anything else done with that correspondence.
Maybe I better read that out, do I? It's good? Okay, all in favor? Carried. Okay, then we move to committee reports, and my meeting log is there for where I was for the month of December. Any questions on any of that? If not, do we have any council reports? Amanda?
Last night, we had our first joint fire committee meeting in Sebringville. Yeah, it was great, and more to come on that. We set our schedule for the year, and so our next meeting, I believe, is April the 7th.
Okay, anyone else? Jerry?
Well, from the county, I attended my first Spruce Lodge meeting. I'm on that committee, and that was more of an orientation, getting up to speed on the lodge, so I'm looking forward to that in the coming year. Just as a note, perhaps, they are using a lot of agency people, so just to be aware that that cost was quite large for the last couple of years. So I know the amount that we see in their proposed budget, they might be coming back a little bit more. So just be aware of that one. But yeah, looking forward to the Spruce Lodge.
Okay, any other announcements? If not, we need a motion to accept the meeting log and Jerry's verbal report. Moved by Amanda, second by Hugh. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Sorry, no bylaws. We do not have a closed session. We have two notice of motions. So the first motion, notice of motion is, got the right one? Yep, okay. Regarding Resolution 22-292, that Council of the Township of Perth East directs staff to hold a public forum regarding Shakespeare Water. And the notice of motion is that the Council of the Township of Perth East directs staff to report back to Council on the following items related to Resolution 22-292, public forum held December 13, 2022, Sprucedale School, Shakespeare. Number 1, the supporting background policy and authority to initiate the public poll taken on December 13, 2022, paper copy and electronic poll appearing on Perth East website, including reasoning as to why established survey type model was not used. Number 2, background policy and authority to display information at the forum outside of the related BM Ross presentation available on the Perth East website. Number 3, measures that have been taken or will be taken to ensure the integrity and accuracy of paper and online poll submissions, including summaries. Number 4, make available in whatever manner applicable the raw data of the paper and online poll results to council. And number 5, background policy and authority to destroy data after summary as stated on publicly circulated poll documents. So do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Andrew, second by Hugh. Comments or questions? Andrew?
Yes, no, thank you for reading that off, Mayor Eggetts. A couple of these items have actually been clarified a little bit tonight. Just for clarity on why I asked for 4 and 5, most of these items, if not all of them, are some semblance of the questions I received from people during and after the public meeting. So I tried to make them make sense and summarize their comments and put them in front of us to try and get the answers. Number 4 and 5 were resulting actually from a conversation with the Ministry of Environment, and I'm not sure of our situation. They say that, yeah, councils typically run the EA process within kind of loose boundaries. So they had said to me that when I questioned them on behalf of the ratepayers, that that one of the tenets of an EA process is data retention, right? So that's why that one landed on here. The comments is a big part of the EA. So clarity on why, because that was a bit of a surprise, I think, to see that walking in, that the sheet for the people that weren't there, there was a table with the sheets on it, and it said that's gonna we saw the copy on the thing and the verbiage in it. So that's why that was on there. The integrity, I'm not sure what measures they use, but at this point, I guess it doesn't really matter. We're not taking into account the survey. Anyway, background policy and authority, in my opinion, was to be council, makes the decisions, and that's why I put the resolution in there. It didn't say anything about the online thing, which was good to give people a refresher, get warmed up. There's a lot of extra information that was on the storyboards. I think it made it a little more confusing. That's what I saw, and that's what I was told, that people weren't sure what they were looking at because they had already read. So I was wondering to know why that changed, and how it changed. And then the only place I can find where a poll being taken, and this again was overlapping with my conversation with the Ministry of Environment, is that it would be a question on a ballot at an election time that we would take a poll like this, and that's kind of one of the areas where it jumps out in a municipal perspective. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just it wasn't really not normal, expected from the comments I heard when I inquired. So, and having said all that, I think most of these are now mute, so I am going to withdraw it.
Okay. All right, so the motion is withdrawn. Okay, then we'll move on to the second notice of motion, and it's regarding Resolution 21-158, received for information, refer to Perth County Planning Department, attached background information to a company notice of motion for reference, number 1, copy of Resolution 21-158, and number 2, correspondence from Samuel Head Consultant, Avon River Estate Expansion Plans, Agenda Item 9.1, May 4th, 2021, regular meeting of council. And the notice of motion is that the Council of Perth East directs staff to follow up and report back to council with information related to Resolution 21-158 from all sources, including County of Perth Planning Department. So Andrew moves. Do we have a seconder? Hugh? Any questions or comments? Jerry?
So just a little confused on this. So this was a notice of motion to bring information forward, yet it did get brought forward before we even approved the motion, right? We're looking at some of those things. So staff did bring them forward before, is that not what we see here? Page 201, 202, all that information that has been requested from this motion is basically here. Unless I'm wrong. Am I wrong in reading into this? Someone help me out?
Andrew?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So I requested the clerk put that on there so everybody would have a frame of reference about the correspondence I was talking about. That's the actual correspondence. My question is and that this is, I believe that this is related to the shift from arsenic to expansion, and that's great, but I cannot find any reference of where this went other than the resolution we had and where it came back. So this may take a little bit of effort. Maybe council knows staff knows what happened. They can just say now, but, and don't take any time to look it up. But it didn't land in the county that I can see in any of their documents at council. So I don't know where it went. And I believe it's part of the water discussion that's going on, because it was specifically asking for, if you read it, especially the last few pages, water capacity for expansion in Shakespeare. And it happened directly after the April 7th ESR final report. So I'm just trying to connect all the dots so you get a full completion of the process of how we got where we are. I realize it's a ways back. I personally didn't see this for a year after it, but this file is still current. So I'd like to know if we can get some feedback on where this went, what happened, and what the results were.
So my recollection is that we received it for information. We forwarded it to the planning department. It would not appear on county council's agenda because we didn't send it to county council. We sent it to the planner to look at this information when they did the official plan. So I'm thinking that they still have this information, and when they're working on the official plan, they're using the information that was sent in to them to figure out what they're going to do with the official plan. Am I correct? Ashley?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, that's where it's at right now. They're waiting for the official plan to be reviewed and approved, and this falls into that group, the official plan amendment.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm asking because it's directly asking for extra water capacity over and above the one we have now. So just so council knows that that's why I'm asking about this, is this is a part of this. I just didn't see any response and nothing went to county. So it's in the county. Is it okay at council's discretion, the mayor's discretion, that I contact Planner McMullen and ask the status of it, or do we want to do that officially as a group?
That's entirely up to you. That's not up to council.
Oh, okay. I'll phone her and ask her then, save us some work.
Throughout the official plan updating process, there's been an open commenting period for anyone. And so this would have been treated in that manner as well. So yeah, there's absolutely, yeah, you can certainly contact Sally about the status of the official plan and about where this went, and I think that would be her response. But I'm making that assumption, but I don't know. It was, as our clerk has described and the mayor described, it was forwarded to county planning based on direction from council at the time and when it was first received.
No, I appreciate the comments. I'll see what they have to say. I know I was not included in the stakeholder groups, but I was paying attention to the process. So I don't know exactly who sat in on those developer stakeholder groups, but I can inquire and save us some work.
Okay, so you want the motion to stay then? Is that correct?
I'll withdraw. I'll withdraw.
You withdraw?
Save us some time.
Okay, it'll be withdrawn as well. Okay, do we have any new business? Oh, right, okay. The Council of the Township of Perth East received the presentation from Laura Hallahan, Perth East Public Library Board Chair, and Mark Steffen, Perth East Public Library Board Vice Chair, presentation of the Library Organizational Review for Information. Mover and a seconder, moved by Amanda, second by Hugh. All in favor? Carried. Any other new business? Any announcements? Any oh, there is a confirmatory bylaw. So the bylaw number 23-001 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Township of Perth East at its regular meeting held on January 10, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time. Moved by Hugh, second by Amanda. All in favor? Carried. And adjournment, that we adjourn at 9:04. Moved by Amanda, second by Andrew. All in favor?